Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Nyama, Warranjeri Woyoang Gulin, Gunga Ninu Bik Wenoap Darabandari, Nyariana Nyanga Bik Ban Ba Nyagu, Gagukal Nangit Bambuth Yalingbu Ba Gamaji. I acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people who are the traditional owners of the land. I recognise their continuing connection to land, water and culture, and I pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. Membership of this meeting is as listed on the agenda, noting that we have apologies from Councillor Greco and Councillor Lesurf. Councillors, are there any conflicts of interest in relation to the item on the agenda tonight? No? That being so, we'll move straight to item 4, the local government bill. That's moved by Councillor Newton and seconded by Councillor McCarthy. Apologies, yes, Councillor Newton, if you could make clear what it is you've moved. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Rennie. So I would like to move the item as proposed in the agenda, and I have one addition that I'm just getting the words up for. So I think I'm going to have to write it down and give it to our officers. So just give me 1 sec, please. Thanks.
So to clarify, that's the recommendation on page 2, as per the notice of motion that you'd put in for the previous meeting, the urgent business.
Yes, with one addition that I'm just writing.
Thank you.
Mayor, while Councillor Newton's preparing those words, I've got a question that I was going to raise, which I may do now, which relates to the...
Certainly, that'll give some time for Councillor Newton to get those words in.
Through yourself, Mayor, just wanting to, for councillors' interest and also for the interest of the gallery, given the time frame and given the notice of motion as outlined, what would be the process for council to have line of sight based on the recommendation as it currently, as the notice of motion as it's currently listed, for council to see the submission before it is actually presented and submitted to through the official process?
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. I'll refer that question to Ms Wilkinson. And we're referring that to Ms Fixed.
Through you, Mariani, based on any resolutions that Council makes tonight, we could certainly circulate the proposed response to councillors for any sort of feedback.
A further follow-up question, Councillor McCarthy.
Supplementary as well. Will council also be able to make the submission public so that members of the public can also see it once it's finalised and submitted?
Through you, Mariani, I'm not aware of anything that precludes us from making it public.
Thank you. So, Councillor Newton, I think the words are there. We'll just make sure that they're up on the screen so that everyone is clear what the motion in front of us is. Okay. So, Councillor McCarthy, before you second, I'll just ask you to check that.
Yep, I support this, the additional point as well.
Okay, thank you. So that's moved by Councillor Newton and seconded by Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. These proposed changes have come from nowhere, with no consultation and only 1 month from announcement of the proposed changes to when feedback is due. This gives us no opportunity for a report to come back to Council on the proposed changes, let alone consult with our community on the changes. This is noticeably different to the Local Government Bill, which undertook consultation for 3 years rather than 1 month. The 2018 bill was introduced to Parliament last year but has stalled and not become an updated act yet. There is no way new changes should be considered when the 2018 bill hasn't even become an act yet. These heavy-handed changes have come from nowhere and give far too much power to the minister and disenfranchise and undermine the role of the Victorian Electoral Commission to be a, quote, independent and impartial statutory authority established under Victoria's Electoral Act 2002, end quote. By declaring a blanket single-member ward structure across Victoria, this completely undermines the ability of the VEC to determine a recommendation for what works for each council. As far as I looked back, I could not see one example where the VEC has ever recommended a change from multi-member wards to single-member wards in every example that I looked at. These proposed changes also completely undermine and confuse the VEC process that's happening concurrently to review 12 council ward structures in the next 3 months, including Darebin's. In 2007, during our last review, the community wanted multi-member wards, and this was the change that was made, with 2008 becoming the first time to have 3 multi-member wards in Darebin. According to the session I attended with the VLJ last week, if these proposed changes go through, they'll override the recommendations made by the VEC later this year. This is completely undemocratic. Why should the recommendations of the Independent Statutory Authority be overridden by the will of a local government minister to go against evidence-based ward structures based on community needs and the VEC recommendation? Look around this table. This is a council with 6 women and 3 male councillors, the highest in Darebin's history and one of the highest amount of female councillors in the state. This has occurred under the current system of 3 wards with 3 councillors in each ward, the structure that currently allows for the highest amount of female councillors, with initial findings showing that currently in Victoria, councils that have 3 councillors over 3 wards have on average 43.85 female councillors. Single-member wards, on the other hand, have 33.8% female councillors. This is a council that has gender diversity and political representation. This will change if these changes go through. We could return to the bad old days of one party and even one faction dominating the council. The petition process, where 25% of voters could petition to have a councillor dismissed, could easily be misused by political parties or lobby groups aiming to get particular councillors dismissed and could easily become a lynch mob. In no way would this allow councillors to be able to make difficult decisions without fear of being dismissed by a kangaroo court. In a hotly contested political environment like Darebin, this could lead to instability and chaos. No other level of government is subject to this trial by a community, so why should local governments be?
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. Myself and yourself, Mayor, and many other councillors and CEOs attended a consultation in relation to this particular proposal, and just this week. And what was striking was, in fact, to hear once again, as Councillor Newton has outlined, that we went through as a sector many years of consultation around a new local government bill, which has effectively been put almost on hold while we consider 6 proposals that have been developed in the Minister's office, not based on any evidence base, not based on any comprehensive survey of local government or electors or community, not based on any scoping in terms of what the actual outcomes would be, but rather what you could only describe as an opinion. We are asked in this chamber to make decisions and formulate positions on the basis of evidence, and hopefully we look at the right evidence and we hopefully come to good decisions on that basis. That's all we can also expect from our Parliament, and it's all that we can expect from our Minister, the Minister who is responsible for local government, when considering what is actually a really important thing, which is how do you ensure the right type of representation for communities that are often facing the challenges of growth, challenges of population growth mixed with density of development. In a situation like Darebin's, we know over the next decade, based on the state government's own figures, that our population is expected to grow in the order of around 40,000 people. That is the equivalent of a council ward or multiple council wards. What that means is that if the minister's proposal as it stands goes through, Darebin wards, if they were single-member wards, as the minister has almost dictated at the moment, would actually have to be reshaped every couple of years just to keep up. That is an expensive
10 seconds.
process, and I don't think our electors want to be shoved from one ward to another 3 years within the same 3-year period. This is a flawed proposal.
Thank you. Are there further speakers? Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Mayor Rennie. I'd like to speak against the notice of motion. Yes, notwithstanding the speed of this, both the motion coming here and coming into Parliament, and not allowing us to do local consultation, I have to have looked at this for the last few weeks just based on local conditions. Now, knowing the area fairly well and having represented a single ward and twice and also represented multi-member wards 3 times, there's actually some natural politics in this area, which is that 70% support Green or Labor or support climate change and a range of issues, social justice. It's one of the most progressive communities in Australia. So, being that as may, I'm not sure that the single ward or the current 3 multi-member ward will make any change to gender. In fact, when we switched to multi-member, we went to only 1 woman out of 9 for 2 terms. So actually the record is that there was higher representation under single member of female councillors in this area. And the other thing is there's some natural independent areas. So I think the single wards will result in 3 Greens, 3 Labor and 3 Independents, and will be not much different to the current amount, except in a certain way. The current system's flawed in that the last 24.9% of voters are not even counted and have no voice. That was a mistake. So there's some errors in the current one, and I don't see any reason for our local traditions to actually oppose this single or multi-member.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Are there further speakers? Councillor Amir.
So, as was mentioned by Councillor Newton, there's been work happening on reforms to the Local Government Act for the last 3 years, and there was some very good work that happened within the public service, extensive consultation, and I understand some very good ideas to come out of that. And some of that we can see has been put forward in the proposals here. And then there's a couple of things that seem to kind of make no sense unless you're looking specifically from a political perspective rather than a community perspective. And for me, the 2 that have been mentioned previously, and I'll talk about again as well, are the compulsory shift to, well, as they come up, to single member wards, and secondly, the option for dismissal of councillors by petition. So some of the reasons against single member wards have been mentioned already, including the number of women on council, and we can see if we look at a state level that multi-member wards do lead to a greater number of women getting elected. There's also other forms of diversity to think about other than just political parties and gender. And I think one of the things from a personal perspective that's really good as having 3 councillors for each ward is that the 3 of us are quite different in lots of ways, and we have different expertise, we have different passions, and different people voted for us, which means that for people in the community, they have the choice of who they want to go to. They're more likely to be able to go to the councillor that they themselves have voted for, or who is more likely to share their interests. It also means that people have more access to councillors. If, the cricket club wants someone to give a speech on a Saturday night, the chance of someone being free is higher. In regards to the proposal to have councillors dismissed by petition, it is extremely alarming. 2 of my primary concerns. One is that it's not possible for the community to know everything about everything happening in the council at any given time. And I'm concerned that the wrong person will take the blame for something that was not their fault, such as the mayor of the day on something they didn't support. Oh,
Thank you, Councillor Amir, that's done. Are there further speakers? There being none, Councillor Newton, you have a right of reply.
Thank you, Mariani. So, I don't think that this is necessarily about whether we should have single-member wards or whether we should have multi-member wards. This is about proposed changes that are saying that single-member wards are the only possible option apart from unsubdivided, which goes against basically every recent VEC recommendation, which always recommends to stay single-member, stay unsubdivided, or change to multi-member. So it's not about an either-or, it's not about whether single-member is necessarily better for our community or worse, because the VEC recommends that with our community submission, with our voice, whereas this is basically talking about overriding that completely. And to Councillor Lawrence's point about 24.9% potentially not being considered in a 3-member ward, in a single-member ward you could have 49.9% not considered. So I think that is not really a reason. So for me, I think it's incredibly important that Darebin stands against this bill, against these changes, and I would like to see, we're a council that is based on evidence, is based on consultation, is based on good decision making. This is not that.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour and against? That motion is carried. That brings us to the end of the business of this meeting tonight. So on that note, I'll close the meeting and thank you to...
Can I have my opposition note?
Yes, you may have your vote motors and Councillor Williams also. So we'll note that Councillor Lawrence and Councillor Williams voted against that motion. So thank you particularly to members of the gallery for coming along to hear this debate. We'll see you next time.